To meeting number 45 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room as well as remotely through Zoom. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of both the members and the witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please do remember to mute yourselves when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom is at the bottom of your screen, and you have a choice of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Now, for today's purposes, the topic of our meeting is the current situation between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and more specifically, a focus on Lachin Road. I'd like to welcome the two witnesses who will each have 5 minutes for opening remarks. First, we have Mr. Robert Cutler, who's a former senior research fellow at the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at Carleton University. And we also have Ms. Alessia Vartanyan, who is the Senior South Caucasus Analyst for the International Crisis Group. You will each be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks, but when you only have 30 seconds remaining, I will put up this red sign. Would be grateful if you paid attention to that. The same goes when members are asking you questions. When you only have 30 seconds remaining, I will put this up as a warning. So, Mr. Cutler, we will commence with you. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you for the privilege. For identification purposes, I am a fellow of Canadian Global Affairs Institute and director of the Energy Security Program, NATO Association of Canada. I appear in my personal capacity. The views I express are my own. I matriculated at MIT for the bachelor's degree and earned the PhD at the University of Michigan, and have taught at all university levels in Canada and internationally. For over 20 years, I was a senior research fellow, as you said, at Carleton University. I will make my opening statement in English, et je répondrai à toute question.
And I'll answer any questions that have been in French.
Cooperation with Azerbaijan and Armenia, starting with NATO's Partnership for Peace program in 1994. Beginning in 2001, tens of thousands of military aircraft and supply trucks transited to Azerbaijan, carrying NATO forces and equipment to Afghanistan. Beginning in 2002, the Azerbaijani Peacekeeping Battalion participated in the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan, and when the Northern Distribution Network was established in 2009, Azerbaijan continued to be a key link until it was closed a few years ago. Canada has had formal diplomatic relations with both Azerbaijan and Armenia since 1992, when it recognized their territorial integrity within the borders they had before the Soviet collapse. Acknowledging 4 UN Security Council resolutions from 1993, Canadian policy has always supported Azerbaijan's territorial integrity and opposed separatism, just as it has done in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Like Canada, Azerbaijan gives tangible support to Ukraine. It sends large cargoes of humanitarian aid. The state oil company of the Azerbaijani Republic, SOCAR, owns filling stations in Ukraine that give free fuel to such emergency services as ambulance and fire trucks. Azerbaijan recently provided Ukraine with emergency power generators for winter use. What can Canada do today? First, Ottawa should do more to help demine the full 1/6 of Azerbaijan's territory, a region more than twice as large as the Greater Toronto Area that was militarily occupied over the course of 30 years. Canada's contribution to the demining effort in Azerbaijan has, sorry to say, not matched its international prominence in the issue. Many countries, NGOs, and international organizations around the world contribute not just funding, but also personnel and training and education assistance to Azerbaijan's long-term demining program. Around the single destroyed city of Agdam, no fewer than 80,000 mines were discovered and neutralized. Estimates of the number of mines laid throughout the formerly occupied territories range upwards of 1 million. Canada should also encourage Armenia to fulfill its obligation under international law to turn over to Azerbaijan all maps of the mines that its forces laid during 30 years of military occupation, which it has refused so far to do. Second, Canada should open an embassy in Azerbaijan. The latest crisis on the Lachin Road, indeed the whole political instability in the region, is today engineered by Russia, which seeks to derail the peace process. The European Union, United States, and other Western powers all agree that only direct bilateral contacts and negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia will succeed in arriving at a definitive settlement. Azerbaijan has many times declared its willingness to embrace Armenia, to reconcile the two civil societies, and to build mutually beneficial cooperation, economically and otherwise. Russia alone opposes this because it does not want to be locked out of the region where it has been so long accustomed to being the sole hegemonic power. Both Canada and Azerbaijan are genuinely multicultural middle powers that continually punch above their weight in international diplomacy. Both Canada and Azerbaijan have demonstrated their belief in a rules-based international order by their actions, by their conduct of international diplomacy, by their participation in international cooperation, and by their leadership of international organizations. If Azerbaijan is not as democratic as we might like, then without diplomatic representation, we lose the chance to discover the real pluralism in Azerbaijani society, to engage in open dialogue, and to tell official Baku what we think. Azerbaijan is the most significant local geopolitical player in the broader region. Not only does it provide important support to Ukraine, but also it is a very important ally of Israel, which its neighbor Iran, ironically like Russia, an ally of Armenia in the conflict, does not like. An embassy in Baku is essential, not only to be better represented in the broader Caspian region, but also to get an even-handed view from the ground, sensitive to all the critical nuances upon which the whole future of the region will turn. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cutler. We now go to Ms. Vartanyan. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Good afternoon, Chairman SSC and Vice Chair Bergeron, and distinguished members of the committee. You have already had a chance to listen to a number of speakers who provided details of what's happening on the ground in Nagorno-Karabakh. Today, at this important hearing, I will aim to support you with more context of why we are seeing these developments and what should be done to stop them from happening, and not just now, but also in future. I will be speaking using analysis of my many colleagues at the International Crisis Group. Together, we are doing field research, speaking to those who are affected by the conflict and to decision makers from all different sides, both in the region and in foreign capitals. Crisis Group has been working on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict for over 15 years. During this period, we saw many ups and downs. The latest war was in 2020, and it took the lives of over 7,000 people in 6 weeks of brutal fighting. This year, we at Crisis Group included Nagorno-Karabakh in the top 10 conflicts to watch worldwide. And this is based on our analysis of the events that started taking place last year. Unfortunately, we now see more potential for a new war in the region. And let me explain you why. Last year, Armenia, Azerbaijan started peace talks. Their leaders met several times and foreign ministers started discussing a peace treaty. The sides were really ambitious as they aimed to finalize the work very fast. Some even aimed for the end of the year. But the contents of these conversations are really difficult with too many important parts that still need to be discussed. Unfortunately, with all the complexity of the talks, this negotiation process still has more chances to collapse rather than to succeed. But when and if that collapse happens, this certainly will be a bad news, as it will open chances for more instability in the region. Stakes for a new war are really high. Last year, we already saw 3 escalations, each deadlier than the previous one. 2 of them were in Nagorno-Karabakh and 1 at the border. Azerbaijan has been making use of its military upper hand while Russia has been busy invading its neighbor, and others in the world distracted with responding to the war in Ukraine. As a result, last year, Azerbaijan could seriously reinforce its positions that now provided with significant military advantage should a new fighting start. When I traveled to the place of most recent fighting at the border, I saw Azerbaijani military reinforcing their positions. In case of a new flare-up, the Azerbaijani soldiers can make a military push through the only gorge that now separates their positions from the Azerbaijani exclave of Nakhichevan to the south of Armenia. This would cut Armenia in two, with severe humanitarian consequences, and would leave the Armenian leadership under enormous pressure to make concessions. To prevent this from happening, the European Union announced 2 days ago that it would deploy its civilian unarmed monitors to observe situation on the ground and report directly to all the member states. In the coming days, we at Crisis Group will have a report that discusses in detail what and how should be done to make that mission work. Canada, similar to other interested outside actors, should support this mission and help it get enough staff and the necessary means and mandate to effectively prevent incidents that have the potential to spiral into a new war. The mission will minimize chances for a new war, but it will not be able to completely eliminate the risks. What will be essential is a functional negotiation process that should lead to a peace accord to put an end to this conflict. The European Union has been playing an important role in facilitating more contacts between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It brought the leaders together, was present and ready to help when they agreed to proceed with the peace talks. The US has been supporting this process. The European Union will need to pursue this diplomacy, and it should be supported by those in the region and in foreign capitals. In light of all I have just told you, let me circle back to the events in Nagorno-Karabakh. The situation is getting worse, and many are worried. But as you can see, this is only the most recent manifestation of tensions. Indeed, more diplomatic pressure to relieve the situation is necessary. But what is also needed is a powerful ending the cycle of crisis and flare-ups, each one bloodier than the last. One way forward could be calls for resumed contacts and talks. During the summer, the EU and the US started working on a new track between Baku and Stepanakert. Such contacts could really help with resolving any future problems on the ground. They will also provide more confidence to the local Armenians that they will not be forced out of their home. I will be happy to discuss these ideas in the question and answer session, and thanks again for having me for your session.
Very much, Ms. Vartanyan. We will now go to the members. Each of you will have 6 minutes. Mr. Chong, we begin with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. We're here today in particular to focus on the blockage of the Lachen corridor. So my questions will be focused on that issue in particular. I'd like to understand what exactly is the physical nature of this blockage. Is it at the border between the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Republic of Armenia? Is it within Azerbaijan proper? Does the blockage consist of people standing in the way of traffic, or are there trucks or other pieces of equipment that are blockading the route? I'd like to understand the physical nature of the blockage first. If you could speak to that, that would be helpful. If you don't know, that's also okay. I'll move on to other questions. Either one of you can answer the question, or both of you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Cutler.
Yes, thank you for your question, which betrays a widespread misunderstanding. I'm pleased to inform you that there is no blockage. Since some time, 1,000 trucks of the Russian peacekeeping forces and the ICRC have passed through the Lachen Road. The situation started on December 13th, when Azerbaijani eco-activists sought access to the territory temporarily occupied by Russian peacekeepers in order to verify the observation of ecological laws by a Swiss company, which, contrary to international law, is mining gold in the occupied territories. In fact, a British company, which has the contract to these deposits, has drawn the attention formally of the American, British, and other governments to this fact. The particular problem was that not only that through the corridor or through the road, these illegally mined deposits were being taken to Azerbaijan for refinement and export, but also the ecological problems of not observing the necessary protocols for maintaining the environment. That was the original motive of the Azerbaijani protest on the road on December 13th. What then happened was that the Russian peacekeepers blocked the road by erecting fences across the road to prevent the Azerbaijani protesters from proceeding further. That did block the road for about a week. What then happened was that Armenians from Khankendi, which during the city that during the Soviet period was called Stepanakert, made an excursion, a manifestation out from their city along the road to the place where it was blocked to see that it should be unblocked. Following this, the Russian soldiers took down their fences, and since then, there has been free passage of vehicles through the road to be making sure that there are no illegal exports of gold, making certain that there are no mines being imported to be laid, as has been done, and the road is now open.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. If I could hear an answer from Madame Vartanyan as well on this. What is the physical nature of the blockage? And maybe give your perspective on what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to respond to this question. I believe you have already heard a number of people who not only heard from someone, but also they have a personal connection to the region. We at Crisis Group, we speak to those who are affected by the conflict. And I also had a chance to speak to those who are currently in Stepanakert. In fact, I have been doing that since the very beginning of this blockade that has been lasting for over 40 days. So what I understand is that the people are not able to travel through the road. The 2020 war left us with the peace accord, and according to this peace accord, we got the territories that are currently populated by the ethnic Armenian people, and the Russian peacekeepers are present there. The Russian peacekeepers are responsible for keeping and observing the ceasefire on the ground. In addition to these areas, there is the road, and this is the only road that connects Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia and, as an effect, the outside world. And the current blockage is happening exactly at that place.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. We will now go to Dr. Fry. You have 6 minutes, Dr. Fry.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for being here, because I think what both witnesses have done was to shed some real light on what is going on in the Lachin Road. And I think that that is a big issue that we're here to look at. Is it creating a humanitarian crisis is what we're asking at this committee and what we're trying to find out. And of course, can Canada do anything? Now, I wanted to ask a couple of very important questions. We know that the European Union became engaged. We know that Russia has been meant to do the peacekeeping. We know that there were observers from the European Union there. We know there's a report on all of that. So people are engaged in trying to find out what's going on. I think the big thing that I want to ask about is that the United Nations can intervene. I know the United States has intervened and met with both sides. I know that France has intervened and met with both sides. And we know that Russia actually has officially recently here around Christmas intervened and met with both sides. My question is, what do you think the chances are that the OSCE, which is the group that originally was dealing with the Minsk agreement, why did that fail? What can OSCE do? OSCE doesn't really have troops to put in, but members of the OSCE could actually marshal some help there. I mean, Canada is a member of the OSCE, and of course, as you know, there are 57 nation states, some with and some without any kind of capability. But I wondered, why has the Minsk agreement, which is the official body for negotiating, why did that fail? What is the chances that it can be renewed? And what are the chances that we can put this to an end? Most of us want to see it end. Most of us want to see a peaceful settlement. Most of us want to see people able to go to their homes and want to see ethnic Armenians and Azerbaijani being able to. There was a time when they were friends. There was a time when many of them still continued, as Mr. Cutler said, that multicultural relationship and multi-religious relationship that they used to have. So what can we do? And what is the role of the Minsk? And why did Minsk fail? Those are the two questions I'd like to hear either of you answer. And maybe I'd start with Ms. Vatanian.
This is a great question, especially about the OSCE role. We have both the organization involved, but also the OSCE Minsk group, and the co-chairs are France, Russia, and the US. And as you probably know, the Minsk group has been facing enormous problems with resuming its functions after the 2020 war due to Azerbaijani resistance to engage with the group. Baku believes that the group failed with the negotiations, and we've seen, the peace accord. Baku still tried to engage with the group, but then they saw that it's not really going the way they want, and then the process got into the deadlock. The other reason for why we are not seeing really the OSCE Minsk group coming together is the conflict, is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So when the West got much more involved in mediating between the Armenian and Azerbaijani leaders, we saw Russia basically, withdrawing from the group. It's still there on paper, so there can be a potential for it to come back. But for the very moment, it's difficult to see any kind of cooperation taking place between the US and Russia, including on the Nagorno-Karabakh, unfortunately. Having said that,
Vatanian, I would like to give Mr. Cutler an opportunity, though.
But the OSCE still has the role,
No, round up what you're saying, but I want Mr. Cutler to get
I still want to say that the OSCE should have the role. And with recent events at the border, for example, show that the OSCE can send a mission and can do a fact-finding. But that does not really mean, even if the OSCE, which is Baku is so allergic about, cannot do its job, that does not prevent Canada from doing and then supporting, for example, the European Union the way the US does.
Thank you. Mr. Cutler, please.
Yes, thank you for the question. The OSCE, to pick up on the last point made by the previous speaker, did not in fact send a fact-finding mission because the decision was poorly taken and without terms of reference. The reason why the Minsk group has no chance, I'm sorry to say, is that its terms of reference have become obsolete. The Minsk group terms of reference were predicated upon the peaceful resolution of the conflict, which has not come to pass. You are probably familiar with the 6 points in the so-called Madrid principles that were drafted in 2007 and then revised in 2009. A reading of those 6 points shows on their face that they are obsolete, that either they have been accomplished or they have been overtaken by events, I think is the way to say it. Also, if we look at the three co-chairs of Russia, France, and the US, none of them is interested in the Minsk group anymore. The US, just yesterday, the Secretary of State insisted that only direct bilateral contacts between the two parties was the way to proceed. France is not a neutral party due to very public proclamations by President Macron. For example, after the war broke out in the fall of 2020, he told his French co-citizens that France would not allow, this is almost a direct quote because I wrote about it, that will not allow Azerbaijan to reconquer Upper Karabakh, and that France will play its role to prevent this from taking place. That's a very close paraphrase, almost a direct quote. So France is not trustworthy, and one can understand Azerbaijan's mistrust of France in this respect. Finally, Russia, doesn't want to give the U.S. or France a voice in things because they had until Charles Michel began his mediation or his convocations in December of 2021, which were very successful up until a point. Russia, following from the November 2020 trilateral statement, was monopolizing the interactions between the two countries. So none of the co-chairs of the Minsk group has
Out of time. I'm afraid you're out of time, Mr. Cutler.
has an incentive to proceed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Thank you, Mr. Cutler. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Bergeron, you have 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. I'm going to start with Mr. Cutler, and I'd like to say off the bat that you've given a presentation of this situation, which it seems to me is an alternative presentation of the reality underway there. Namely, this presentation does not seem, on the surface at least, to match up with the information that's circulating as to what's actually happening in the Lachin corridor. So given that, I welcome your contribution to the work of our committee, but that means that right away I've got a question for you, because I must admit that I have severe doubts about your presentation insofar as the fact that Canada, the US, the European Union, France, which is not a viable, credible, neutral player here according to your words, but immediately in the first hours, in the first days of the blockage, as of the 12th of December, which was to have taken place as of the 12th of December, all of these countries asked Azerbaijan to reopen communications. You presented a sequence of events which is different from this. So are you implying that the intelligence services of the US, the EU, France, and Canada were completely off track?
Je comprends que vous avez terminé.
I understand that you finished. Mr. Chair, can I respond? Yes, you may.
The floor is yours, Mr. Cutler.
Merci.
Thank you for your comments. MP, it's not a question of the intelligence services here. It's information that's been circulated by mass media. I can reassure you right away that all of my comments that I'm sharing with you are based on reports on the ground that I follow on a daily basis. This alternative presentation is different from this version of the events that's presented by mass media, and I'll give you an example of this. From the very outset, we heard a great deal about 120,000 inhabitants in Stepan and Kert who didn't have enough food and so on and so forth. And I'd like to see, frankly, MP, that the 120,000 people is an obsolete figure which dates to before the war in 2020. And according to public statements from the Armenian authorities in Stepanakert, the population is only 30,000 in Stepanakert. And then we've heard about gas being cut off. And we're blaming the Azerbaijanis for this. It's an underground gas pipeline which was built under the occupation period, and it's controlled by the Armenian state. It's the Armenians that actually provide this gas to the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. So Azerbaijan would not be able to cut off these gas supplies. Last year, there was the same story that came up, and I remember that because I follow these events very closely, and I'm sure that next year they'll come out with the same story again. The Azeris, in fact, had to ask for permission from the Armenian authorities and also the Russian troops to actually intervene on the ground to take the necessary steps, and then the problem was resolved. So it's not a question of the intelligence services, secret services, private services, or privileged information, but rather this is information that's being propagated by mass media. And we've learned for some time now that we need to be skeptical when it comes to assessing that type of information. So by way of conclusion, MP, I'd like to reassure you that I follow this very closely on a daily basis. I follow up these events. And this alternative story, as you've said, it is alternative to the so-called reality that is depicted by mass media. But I can assure you that that is the reality on the ground. Now, I don't want us to fall into conspiracy theories where you'd be saying that mass media is trying to impose a narrative on people that doesn't match up with reality. And it's directed by whom from a distance and why, I don't know. But I'm very astonished by your comments where it would seem that you're implying that states such as Canada, the United States, or the European Union would apparently be basing their public positions on the international stage just based on mass media information rather than basing it on information that's provided to them by their intelligence services. However, leaving that aside, I'd like to now turn to Ms. Vartanian, and apparently I've got very little time left, but when we come back afterwards, perhaps you could already say a few words on this, in fact. Namely, the trilateral statement, the ceasefire statement says that the Lachin corridor should be under the control of the peacekeeping forces from the Russian Federation. Azerbaijan commits to guaranteeing the safety of the transport of people and the movement of goods in both directions. But it seems that the movement in one direction has been prohibited. So this seems to be a violation of the ceasefire agreement, does it not?
Vartanian, I'm afraid you only have 20 to 30 seconds to respond. We're well over the allotted time. Thank you.
There is no need for me to spend more time. We just need to look at the ceasefire statement made in November 2020. And similar to WIS, there is also the OSCE statement about sending the mission, fact-finding mission to Armenia last year, the one that Mr. Cutler questioned a while ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vartanian. We now go to MP Davies. Mr. Davies, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be directing my questions to Ms. Vartanian. I guess I'm trying to, it appears to me, I'm sensing that there may be some different versions of what's going on factually on the ground. So, Ms. Vartanian, is it your information or testimony that there is or is not a blockade of the Lachin Road right now?
We clearly identify the current events as a blockade similar to organizations like a Human Rights Freedom House and Amnesty International. There are also others who are identified with very events as a blockade.
Thank you. And following up on my colleague, Mr. Bergeron's question, referring to the November 2020 ceasefire agreement that stipulates that the Lachin corridor remains under the control of the peacekeeping contingent of the Russian Federation, I believe that's a direct quote, and commits Azerbaijan to guaranteeing the, quote, security of the movement of citizens, vehicles, and goods in both directions along the Lachin corridor, end quote. Is that happening right now? Is, in your view, what steps is Azerbaijan taking or not taking to secure the movement of goods and people in both directions on the Lachin corridor?
For over 40 days, we have been seeing Azerbaijani civilians blocking the only road that connects Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia. There are a number of facts that identify with activists as connected to the Azerbaijani government. We have been doing our own research into that, and it's clear that with activists, they have the links to the government. Even more, we have been seeing the Azerbaijani leadership speaking and voicing some of their statements, and repeating using the same wording that is used by the activist. That makes us believe that those in the international community that are calling on Azerbaijan to basically, follow the agreement and guarantee the security and the free passage there, they are right, by exercise and calling on Azerbaijan for doing something around that.
Now, on January 19th, the European Parliament adopted a resolution that condemned the, quote, inaction of Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh, and they called for their replacement with OSCE, international peacekeepers, under a UN mandate. At the same time, that resolution criticized the Minsk group for its inactivity. Do you agree with the European Parliament's call for the replacement of Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh with OSCE peacekeepers under a UN mandate? And if so, why or why not?
I understand that it's really very important to proceed the discussions on the security and human rights of the ethnic Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh. According to the ceasefire statement made by Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia, with the Russian peacekeepers that are currently there, present in the Armenian populated areas of Nagorno-Karabakh, responsible for observing the ceasefire. If the international community can help the sides to come up with a peace accord and that can guarantee, that can give some other security reassurance by guaranteeing again that the local ethnic Armenians can continue living there, I'm sure I'm not the only one. Many will be supporting that. The very first steps for this to happen, I believe, is still to look into the possibilities of resuming the international presence on the ground. Right now, we only have the ICRC that is having only the humanitarian mandate present on the ground. We would strongly, we at Crisis Group, from the very beginning, right after we saw the ceasefire statement in 2020, we have been pushing, in fact, for more involvement of the international community, including by the UN, for example, assigning a mission that could have an access and could see and observe the situation on the ground, report directly to the UN Security Council on a regular basis. Which I'm sure would not just help us learn better and firsthand about the events without really kind of references to some strange reports and referring to some Twitter posts that some people follow, but that could help us understand what's happening and what can be done to start proceeding to finishing with conflict.
I guess I'll end with that. I guess everybody, I think I speak for everyone, we all would like to see peace in the region for all sides. And how do views on the prospects of peace differ, say, in Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Nagorno-Karabakh? And what are the opportunities and hurdles to creating sustainable peace in the region?
I think Armenia and Azerbaijan, they have been on the very right track. They have been talking and they were discussing the very essence of very difficult topics, and they should continue doing that. There should be no use of force, no situations like what we see in Nagorno-Karabakh. Escalation, they prevent the negotiations, and we should definitely see more contacts taking place between Baku and Stepanakert, guaranteeing the future of ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Thank you. I see Mr. Chair holding up the red square. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to the second round of questions, and the first question goes to Mr. Hoback. Mr. Hoback, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank both witnesses for being here this afternoon. Ms. Vatanya, how do you see the Russians' role in this in regards to being stated as peacekeepers? Do you feel they have the support from both sides? Do they feel that they have the respect and the ability to actually fulfill that type of mandate?
The Russian peacekeepers, they have a very limited contingent present on the ground. They are mainly based along the main roads with their checkpoints. They do not have enough personnel, for example, to provide any kind of security to the local population. From the very beginning, we've raised questions among the locals, but with their understanding that this is the only international presence that has been agreed so far, they were okay and they were very supportive. The longer it went, the more they saw the problems. Azerbaijan has been making use of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the fact that Russia still would prefer to focus only on its war, on its illegal war in Ukraine. What Azerbaijan has been doing, and this is what I described in my notes, it's just previously in my presentation, is that it has been attacking first Nagorno-Karabakh twice last year, and then even the border. And the latest escalation was of, I would say, a normal scale because it lasted for 2 days and it was along 200 kilometers. You cannot really, think that you cannot come up with a spontaneous attack like this without pre-planned actions. And what I'm trying to say is that with Russian deterrence that some were ready to trust in the beginning, it's definitely going away with more questions on the ground. And then that's why I think it's really very good that we are now having this conversation here, because in fact, this is the main question right now, because if it continues like this, who knows, maybe we will see even more violence taking place in the region. And then we definitely don't want to face a situation when we cannot respond to this new war. And I'm afraid that war will be really devastating with serious consequences.
So we see the Russian historical influence in the region for sure. You did make a comment that you've seen the Armenian and Azerbaijan officials actually talking amongst themselves, looking for a path forward. Do you see any other countries interfering with that path forward? Do you see the expats or other groups that are making it impossible for this to actually be accomplished?
I don't think that this is very much the case. Armenia has been a sovereign country for over 30 years. Azerbaijan has a very predetermined and realistic approach to many of the things. I think still the main problem is the fact that they are aiming to finish the process as soon as possible. They are looking into really very difficult topics. Unfortunately, they're doing it without mediation because the OSCE Minsk group has fallen apart, although it still on paper it exists. And in addition to that, there is such a profound lack of trust. When the sides, every time they are afraid that the other side can make use of their words, of their positions, or whatever statement they are to make, that prevents from achieving some of the results that many would want to see. I have been working here for over 15 years, and I was witnessing, the war in 2020. Every single village I went to in Armenia during that war, it had a funeral. And then this is something that has affected people. They want the peace, but that peace should bring the stability, not more potential for a new war.
So then how does the blockade fit into this equation? Like, how does it fit in? Is it part of that process? Is it a negotiating tool? We've heard the surroundings saying it's an environmental protest. It's based on mining issues. And I think a lot of people have discounted that. But is this part of the pawn that's being played in a bigger piece?
Look, if it were about the environment, there are other ways how to proceed, almost like the same day that the process started, when they blocked the road, the local authorities in Stepanakert right away proposed talks. Then they even proposed, okay, if you don't trust us, then let's bring international experts. Let's bring some international NGOs that can help us to look into your concerns and achieve and somehow resolve the problem. But we clearly see that there is no traction, there is no communication going on around that. The current blockade is a continuation of all the problems we have been seeing last year, with more escalation and more masculinity shown by Azerbaijan. There is a need to find a way to address it, especially with growing humanitarian problems on the ground.
Okay, it looks like the chair has given me the red book, so I'll stop there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mr. Oliphant. Mr. Oliphant, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, set my clock here. Thank you to the witnesses, and I would imagine you can tell that we are trying to unravel something here to get a clear picture of the micro situation within the macro context. The macro context is 100 years old, we understand that, and a conflict that, that emerged in 1992 and continues to this day. So it is very hard for us to sort out what is happening on the road at this time. We are hearing different versions of reality, and I don't want to cast any aspersions on any of the realities we've heard, but to try to understand what it is that is happening. And if you don't have firsthand knowledge, can you point me now to someone who does? Who for both the witnesses, whom should we be talking to find out the situation? Mr. Chair, if you could ask the witnesses to respond, because they can only speak to you, not me.
Mr. Kotler, if you could go first, please.
Yes. I believe that there are open source satellite photographs that are available without interpretation to be inspected. There are all kinds of reports from the ground, given that this is the year 2023. It's necessary, of course, to evaluate these reports very carefully, but with practice, it's possible to do so. And it is not necessary to have a complotist view of things in order to suggest that skepticism is always a good thing when one is evaluating information that is provided by people who have an interest in the information being believed or disbelieved. I can only answer my personal experience, my individual experience, trained as in the last decade of the Cold War, cut my teeth on reading the Soviet press. It's just necessary to evaluate even testimony that looks like it's firsthand, that says it's firsthand. It's always necessary to ask the question about the motives of the people who are providing it. What are the other angles? And also it's like a jigsaw puzzle, to put all the pieces together, to equilibrate, to balance what's more likely, what's less likely. I'm not certain, sir, that there's a single or even a small handful of sources to which one can have recourse with confidence to say that these are what the ones we have. With all due respect to the International Crisis Group, which I highly respect, they are one of a large number of analytical
Thank you. I'm just going to cut out there because I just have one more minute and want to. I actually want to move on now to a different point, which is, if truth is the first casualty of war, which I think we are hearing today, and there's somewhere truth is in there, it would seem to me that we have to back up then and solve this, what was at one point a frozen conflict, which is now skirmishes from time to time, and a blockade on a road, which may or may not be causing a humanitarian crisis. What are your suggestions for the way ahead? Do we put emphasis into the Minsk process? Do we look at an alternative process? Is it at the EU, another UN process? What would you be recommending? Ms. Vartanyan first.
Thank you so much. I think there are two things that should be done around the blockade. First, I think Canada should continue exercising the pressure on Baku so that we can start seeing at least more movement going on, along that road. I speak to people on the ground on a regular basis, and I understand that it's getting worse and worse. And the contacts, unfortunately, are non-existent. The ones that could, for example, resolve some of the problems with the lack of the gas supply or some shortages with the electricity, the lines are on the Azerbaijani-controlled areas. The second is really very important to call for the talks, and in that sense, the idea that the European Union and the US have in creating with direct channel between Baku and Stepanakert is a great idea, I believe, and that could satisfy all the sides. And it's really very important to continue supporting the European Union's efforts in bringing the leaders together. And as I said, I think Canada should be supporting the mission, the European mission to the Armenian-Azerbaijani border.
We will now go to Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Bergeron, you have 2.5 minutes.
Excuse me, sir.
Mr. Cutler,
directed to me?
Mr.
Was
Cutler,
not the question directed to me?
Mr. Cutler, it was directed, but it went completely over time, so apologies for that. We're going to have to go to the next member. Mr. Bergeron, you have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. I have the opportunity as an active participant in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly to hear the rhetoric of Armenia and Azerbaijan when it comes to this conflict that's stretched on over several decades, as Mr. Oliphant has already pointed out. And we're aware of the fact that the problem of the Lachin corridor is directly linked to this overall conflict. Zoran Shiriev, an analyst from the International Crisis Group, explained to Eurasia Net on the 15th December that if Baku acts in good faith locally, that could reduce the risks around the peace agreement. So very quickly, what do you think the prospects are for a possible peace agreement? Is peace possible, or should we resign ourselves to the fact that there will be this permanent state of war between the two countries? And that's for one or other or both witnesses. Thank you, Chair. Can you please recognize me, Chair?
Thank you.
Now, Member, we, of course, could agree to a commitment to be made between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh, and that took place in summer and in the fall. And I'm sure that the other expert appearing before you today knows as well as me that a new leader was parachuted in from Moscow who's not of Karabakhi origin, Rubin Vataryan, but I'm sure there's no relationship between him and yourself, Madam. And so he was parachuted in, and I'm not going to tell you everything about this envoy, but once he appeared, the Armenian policy hardened. Things had been improving up until then. So that's my answer, and I'd like to take this opportunity to say that I agree with the fact that we need to exert pressure on Baku. But as I said earlier at the outset, there needs to be a Canadian embassy in Baku so that Baku is aware of what Canadians are thinking about all this. And what can Canada do? Canada should promote questions related to mining and fulfillment of the 2020 agreement. Thank you.
and this happened in the previous round as well, Mr. Bergeron. So we now go to the final question to Mr. Davies. You have 2.5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madame Vartanyan, I think in addition to, I guess, political solutions, we must also pay attention to legal structures if we are truly building a rule of law-based international system. And to that end, I noticed that, I note in December 21, the European Court of Human Rights indicated to the government of Azerbaijan that it should, quote, take all measures that are within their jurisdiction to ensure safe passage through the Lashin corridor of seriously ill persons in need of medical treatment in Armenia and others who are stranded on the road without shelter or means of subsistence, end quote. At the same time, the court noted that the extent to which the government of Azerbaijan were currently in control of the situation in the Lashin corridor was disputed and unclear. I'm wondering what your sense of that is. Why is Azerbaijan unable to control the situation in the corridor, or is it in control of the situation in the corridor?
I think I said it before that we see that Azerbaijan is in control of the protesters that are present at that road. And there are the signs that the protesters coordinate closely with Azerbaijani governmental structures. And even more, we see the Azerbaijani leadership speaking and using the same wording that is used by the protesters.
Thanks. I guess where I'll end is on the humanitarian situation. It appears challenging to get information about the situation. Can you give us a basic picture of what the current state of humanitarian situation facing the people in the region are right now?
The local people, they experience a shortage in food. There are no vegetables and fruits for weeks now. There are the problems with the medical supplies. So if you go to the local drugstore, you cannot get even elementary painkillers, not to mention some drugs that are needed for those who have a cancer, for example, or diabetes. In addition, on top of this, almost half of the Nagorno-Karabakh population lives in Stepanakert, and you can see very long lines of people in front of the stores who are trying to buy at least eggs or some cheese that is brought from the villages because they don't have any other food coming to Nagorno-Karabakh because of the blocked road. And in addition to that, the people, locals on the ground, they started experiencing the problems with the heating. So the gas comes and goes, again, gas pipeline and electric lines there on the Azerbaijani controlled territory. And because of that, you can see people not just having a shortage of food, elementary food, and then no medical supplies, but in addition to that, they are just freezing and with this winter and with our mountains.
Thank you very much. At this juncture, allow me to thank Mr. Kotler. Let me also thank Ms. Vartanyan. Thank you for your time, for your perspective, and for your testimony. It was very helpful, and I know I speak on behalf of every member of this committee when I say that we hope to see an immediate, peaceful resolution to this conflict. Thank you. We will now suspend for 5 minutes. The fourth hour of our hearing into the current situation between Azerbaijan and Armenia, with specific reference to the Lachlan Road. We are grateful to have with us here today. First, we have Mr. Anar Jahangirli, who is the chairman of the board of the Network of Azerbaijani Canadians. We also have Professor Christopher Waters of the University of Windsor. You will each be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then it will be followed by questions from the members. When you only have 30 seconds remaining, I will put up this sign, so please do wrap it up, and that applies both to your opening remarks as well as the questions that are put to you by the members. So, Mr. Jahangirli, you have 5 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Dear committee members, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to testify. I represent the Network of Azerbaijani Canadians, a grassroots community organization advocating for Canadian Azerbaijanis. Earlier today, the committee heard from 4 Armenian witnesses and an expert who happens to be Armenian. I think it's very symbolic that the other side needs to present its point of view in 5 iterations. The Azerbaijani point of view will deliver the important facts that are missing from an inflamed narrative. One witness shall suffice to deliver the truth. I've come to speak here at a very difficult time for the South Caucasus region, at a time when Russia's Vladimir Putin is trying to engineer yet another crisis and crack the fragile peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It is therefore very important to pause and look at what is not being said, so we can put the situation into context of what is actually taking place in the region. I'll talk about 3 important timelines. The first period covers the time when Armenia encouraged irredentism and ethnic separatism in Azerbaijan in the last years of the Soviet Union. Right after the collapse of the USSR, the conflict turned into a full-scale war. The single mass atrocity of this conflict, the Khojaly massacre, was committed against the Azerbaijani civilians in the heart of Karabakh, where 613 people were killed overnight by Armenian troops. The war stopped in 1994, leaving about 15% of Azerbaijan's internationally recognized territories under Armenia's occupation. 700,000 indigenous Azerbaijani population of Karabakh ethnically cleansed from Karabakh and forced to live in IDP camps across the country. Speaking of refugees who were truly forgotten by the world, add to it another 200,000 Azerbaijanis from Armenia proper. Since then, for 26 years, there have been negotiations, or rather an imitation of negotiations, with Armenia taking no steps to withdraw from the illegally occupied Azerbaijani territories. The second timeline of events to look at was when the war erupted in September 2020 and saw Azerbaijan liberate most of its territories that were illegally occupied by Armenia. On November 9th, after Azerbaijan took control of the key terrain and historic Azerbaijani town of Shusha, Armenia agreed to sign the statement by which it provided a schedule to withdraw its troops from the rest of the occupied Azerbaijani territories. Unfortunately, some clauses of the said agreement remain unimplemented by Armenia, which I'm happy to elaborate if time permits. Based on the mentioned statement, a Russian peacekeeping contingent is deployed in the region until November 2025. Since then, the parties have been engaged in peace talks. Last year in October in Prague, Azerbaijan and Armenia signed a declaration confirming their commitment to the recognition of each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. It is at that point Putin's regime parachuted an Armenian-Russian oligarch, Ruben Vardanyan, to Karabakh to destabilize the situation and derail the peace process. And this brings me to my final point, where we are now. The said individual, who is, by the way, sanctioned by Ukraine, quickly took power as the so-called state minister within Azerbaijan's Karabakh region, where the Russian peacekeeping contingent is temporarily deployed. Since December 12th, Azerbaijani activists have been demonstrating on the road that the Armenians in Karabakh have been using to connect with Armenia proper. The demonstrations are against the illegal exploitation of gold and copper mines in the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan, not civilians or any humanitarian transport. Currently, Azerbaijani activists are controlling the road to prevent the transfer of illegally extracted gold resources and weapons. I reiterate that it's not blocked to any humanitarian access. This is evident by the many vehicles that continue passing through daily. More than 1,000 vehicles and trucks have passed through the road in the past month and a half. This is the latest information. While the current situation on the Lachin Road is not at all where Azerbaijanis and Armenians should be, we question the motives of those amplifying easily refutable narratives and put forward by a Russia-backed oligarch. We question the motives of those who have not once spoken in favor of the peace process and the signing of a peace agreement, even once, but have instead been regurgitating hateful pro-war propaganda. Our Azerbaijani Canadian community stands firmly against Russia's interference into the South Caucasus region, so Azerbaijan and Armenia can continue the peace negotiations leading to a peace treaty. Therefore, we urge our Canadian government to question whether the narratives it amplifies are A, fact-based or manipulated, and B, whether they will lead to lasting peace in the region or aid the region to returning to Russia's sphere of influence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jahangirli. We now go to Professor Waters. Professor Waters, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and many thanks for the invitation to appear before the committee. I have been studying the South Caucasus for 25 years, and that includes multiple trips to the region in my capacity as a law professor. And the fact that Canada is now engaged with the South Caucasus in a way that they weren't for much of that 2.5 decades is partly thanks to this committee, in particular for its hearings held 2 years ago on the weapons transfers to Turkey and the subsequent ramifications of that for the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. So thank you. I have 3 points. The first is that the blockade of the Lachin corridor represents a current and pressing humanitarian crisis. Secondly, I would argue that Azerbaijan bears state responsibility for that. And third, I would submit that Canada has good reasons to take a stance. So first of all, the Lachin corridor as a lifeline. On November 9th, 2020, as you know, the Russian-backed ceasefire agreement included in part a provision that, quote, the Republic of Azerbaijan shall guarantee the safety of citizens, vehicles, and goods traveling along the Lachin corridor in both directions. And since 2020, the corridor has been a lifeline for the roughly 120,000 residents of Nagorno-Karabakh. This blockade by Azerbaijan has already had dire consequences, and they are poised to worsen. And these actions have involved cutting off of electricity and gas, food shortages, including rationing of staples such as wheat and buckwheat, along with vegetables and other supplies, shortages of medical supplies, and an inability to transfer critically ill Armenian patients, including children, to hospitals in Armenia proper, cutting off some children stranded in Armenia from returning to their families in Nagorno-Karabakh. These actions represent not only breaches of the ceasefire agreement, as well as international humanitarian and international human rights law. They are part of a broader effort to ethnically cleanse Nagorno-Karabakh, and they come in the context of widespread Armenia-phobic statements propagated by the regime and the destruction of cultural property. It should worry us that the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention has issued red flag alerts for genocide in the region. Now, we can recognize that both sides have legitimate concerns about how the ceasefire has been implemented. I absolutely recognize that both sides have legitimate concerns in this regard. And we should press both sides to make genuine efforts to compromise to reach a lasting peace in the region. But there is no scope for false balance or both sidesism over this particular issue of the Lachin corridor. The blockade is having immediate and dire humanitarian consequences for civilians. They are essentially being held hostage. And let's be frank, Azerbaijan is an authoritarian state and claims that this blockade is a result of spontaneous Azerbaijani citizen activism are simply not credible. But don't take my word for it. Human Rights Watch, in its report on Azerbaijan, says the space for independent activism, critical journalism, and opposition political activity has been virtually extinguished, end of quote. Power in Azerbaijan is in the hands of President Ilham Aliyev, a dynastic successor to his father who has served as president since 2003. Even assuming that these eco activists are private Azerbaijani individuals spontaneously blocking the road, Azerbaijan bears state responsibility. A state may be responsible for the effects or conduct of private parties if it does not take the necessary measures to prevent those effects. Let me give an analogy. A state is not responsible for individual citizens taking over an embassy, such as happened in Tehran, but it is responsible if it fails to take measures to prevent that or act appropriately afterwards to protect the embassy or regain control over it. Now, Russia also bears state responsibility here, and perhaps that will come up in questions. My third point is that Canada has good reason to be involved. 2020, as you know, marked the 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Canada and Armenia. The celebrations were muted because of the ongoing violence, not because relations between Canada and Armenia are poor. On the contrary, relations between the two countries have never been stronger. People-to-people links mediated through a sizable and engaged Armenian diaspora in Canada are strong. Politically, Armenia is on a reformist, albeit fraught, track following its 2018 Velvet Revolution. Geopolitically, Armenia is inching away from the Russian orbit. And diplomatically, Canada's recent announcement that would open an embassy in Armenia, its first in the South Caucasus, was a very welcome step, as were the other recommendations from Monsieur Dion to, quote, make Armenia a priority as a fragile democracy, end quote. Monsieur Dion's report was commissioned before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And in his mandate letter, he was specifically told not to look at the geopolitics of Canadian support for Armenia. Since that time, however, Canada's support has taken on greater geopolitical significance. Simply put, Canada's support for fragile democracies in the former Soviet areas matter more. In conclusion, in my view, Canada should, while continuing to press both sides to come to a durable peace, condemn Azerbaijan's actions over this specific issue of the Lachen Corridor in similar words as its allies, the European Union, the Council of Europe, and use all diplomatic and economic tools to ensure that the humanitarian corridor is opened and remains open. Thank you.
Professor Waters, we now turn to the members for their questions. The first member is MP Hoback. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate both witnesses for being here this afternoon to give us their perspectives on the situation. Mr. Jangirli, you talked about the issue about gold and copper mines being front and center here, and that the blockade's there because of environmental concerns, or not necessarily environmental concerns, but concerns that this gold and copper is being mined illegally. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. Azerbaijani side have, on numerous occasions in the past, expressed its grievances that mineral resources, gold and copper resources within Karabakh region are being exploited illegally. So any company, any entity that seeks to conduct a mining activity within the internationally recognized territories of Azerbaijan, they have to obtain a proper licenses. That is as it is in any normal country, in any normal, in Canada, in Europe, anywhere in the world. Those, unfortunately, for 26 years, until 2020, that the area 3 times larger than it is now, that is under where Armenians of Karabakh currently live, were under the occupation of Republic of Armenia, and Azerbaijan could not access those territories to ensure that those licensing is in place. After the war in 2020, Azerbaijan had its territorial integrity established and recognized, as per the statement signed 9th and 10th of the night of 9th and 10th November 2020. Since then, Azerbaijan is putting forward its concerns that the activity, any mining activity that is happening there, must stop immediately. More than that, the mining activity that has happened in the region have destroyed tens and up to maybe 100 hectares of forestry in the region. So this is a huge concern for Azerbaijan as well, that this should not happen, it should stop.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I only have 6 minutes. So I guess the question I have then is, okay, if you have concerns about that specific issue, why would you take it out on the entire population? Why would the blockades block everybody? Why wouldn't you just blockade the vehicles that would be going in and out of the mine, for example, or addressing those. Like you made a comment that there was 1,000 vehicles passed through. We've also heard comments that people were allowed to leave but not come back. So do you have statistics showing the number of vehicles leaving and number of vehicles coming back? Out of that 1,000, how many of those are actually going into the region and how many are leaving the region for good?
So the number that I referred to, 1,000 vehicles have come into the region and gone out of the region, is the Russian peacekeeping forces and ICRC carrying humanitarian aid and necessary supplies for the people living there. I think we have to distinguish the demands of the protesters, the eco-activists that are purely environmental nature, but there are also demands and grievances of Azerbaijani government, which I cannot speak for, but I can explain. The demands of the Azerbaijani government here should be separated from the demands of the eco-activists, but the fact that they're aligned, the fact that they see that the eco-activists are putting forward the very viable and very valid demands, and the fact that Azerbaijani government has certain concerns that must be addressed. So there are two issues here.
I'm confused here then. Like, do you think it's reasonable then, and again, I'm just asking for your opinion, like, it's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to take action against this industry or these people involved in this industry, but to take action against the entire area, the entire region in such a manner does not, like, to me, again, from the outside looking in, looks to me like it's being overplayed. It's being taken to a level that doesn't necessarily need to be there. Would you not agree with that? Like, why would you block food shipments, for example, going into the region? Why would you block medical shipments going into the region? It's one thing if you wanted to block mining equipment going in there or things related to mining equipment, that would be one thing. But why would you escalate it to include other areas or other products, not even with nothing to do with the mining sector? And why would you go so strong against the people that are actually living in that region?
Anyone in Azerbaijan, including the government and the civil society, goes against the people who live there. And the government of Azerbaijan has declared on many occasions that it's ready and it is facilitating the transfer, the traffic through the corridor, through the road for all civilian and humanitarian cargo. The concerns of the Azerbaijani government is related to military cargo and mining equipment and the mined natural resources. So there is an issue at hand that needs to be resolved, that the concerns of Azerbaijani government and Azerbaijani society must be addressed. At the same time, ensure that the people living in that region receive necessary supplies and necessary equipment or necessary life supporting supplies.
So I think I got 30 seconds left here, so it's fairly quick. And Mr. Waters,
I'm afraid your time is over.
I don't
Mr.
have
Hoback.
it.
No.
Okay,
sorry about that. So now we go to Mr. Sorbera. Mr. Sorbera, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today for their comments and presentation. First question to the professor. I just wanted to, if you could just clarify or sort of restate your comments on the role that Russia has to play within the corridor with regards to the November 2020 agreement.
2020 agreement indicates two things with respect to the Lachin corridor. The first is that, quote, Russia has the Lachin corridor, 5 kilometer wide, shall provide a connection of Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia and shall remain under the control of the Russian Federation's peacekeeping contingent. The other part of the paragraph is that the Republic of Azerbaijan shall guarantee the safety of citizens, vehicles, and goods traveling along the corridor. So there's dual responsibilities there. Russia has clearly failed in its responsibility, distracted by the war in Ukraine. There's a power vacuum on the ground, and Azeri authorities and its agents have quite clearly filled that power vacuum.
Okay. My second question, just to follow up, is with regards to the South Caucasus and the importance of that area in the world. You mentioned it earlier on in your comments about the work that was done by this committee to push that agenda forward and the work done by Honorable Dion. If you could kindly comment about why it's so important for Canada to be involved in that region of the world.
Geopolitically significant in terms of its location. Central Eurasia, it's central, a key point in Eurasia, I suppose, with transit from Europe, Iran, and of course all other parts of the former Soviet Union. It's got some interesting and important mineral wealth, oil and gas wealth, and thirdly, I think there are some important Canadian diaspora communities which make it relevant to us. And then finally, as indicated earlier, in the new geopolitical context, as Armenia seeks to extricate itself from the Russian orbit, it's traditionally looked to Russia to be its security guarantor in the face of Turkish and Azeri hostility. This is a chance to support, to use Monsieur Dion's words, a fragile democracy.
Okay, and my follow-up question, and for both of the witnesses today, with regards to the blockade that's occurring, and we've heard some testimony on why and exactly what's happening on the ground. Could we not agree that that it's safe to say that the blockade is having a humanitarian impact for the individuals living in that area, and that impact is a negative one?
Issue about that whatsoever, and it strikes me as being a kind of alternative reality to pretend otherwise. And you know, not only have our allies, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, but also heads of UN agencies, including UNICEF, have made comments about this. I mean, look, some minimal amounts of aid are getting through. I've seen footage of Georgian Red Cross trucks under the guise of an ICRC mission getting through. It's not that there's nothing, absolutely nothing getting through. Very little is getting through, and it's not sufficient to support the civilian population. A fraction of what traditionally goes across.
If we can go to Anar now, please.
Quite right.
Thank you, Mr. Sorbara. I think the fact that the eco-activist demonstrations has limited the traffic. It's obviously limited. However, the necessary supplies are passing through the road, so it is not a blockade. It is a controlled road, and to make sure that the grievances of Azerbaijan is addressed, security concerns of Azerbaijan is addressed, there must be talks between the parties, and there must be a comprehensive solution to that. The November 10th agreement that ended the war in 2020 placed responsibility on Armenian side as well to withdraw all its armed forces from the Karabakh region. It has failed to do so. And in the time period that passed, Armenia used that corridor to transport landmines, to do it, to place in the occupied territory, still in the territory where Russian peacekeeping forces are stationed.
Thank you, Anar. Thank you.
My apologies. That was a mistake on my part. You have another minute, sir.
Oh,
I apologize.
Thank you, Chair. I saw you hold up the red book, so I thought that was a sign to stop there. Okay, thank you. With regards to the current situation, obviously it's untenable. It can't remain as such, and it's safe to say that, if I can just put this out there, and I've heard the questioning from my colleagues, is that any sort of peace agreement going forward, obviously, it's going to involve a bilateral agreement coming with Armenia and Azerbaijan without the interlopers of other countries, namely Russia, playing a spoiler role in that, if I can use that context. Is that where we need to head to, and is that where we need to resolve? And are there the conditions on the ground to do that? You can both take a shot at it, 20 seconds each.
For my, I mean, you put your nail, put your finger right on it. It's very difficult to see the way ahead, but I think it's possible. But one thing's for sure in my mind is that the blocking of humanitarian aid is only going to entrench positions and is going to continue, frankly, de facto ethnic cleansing on the ground. There are real issues to address, and some of them have been raised today in terms of finding a durable peace. But I think it's possible with direct talks as well as international mediation, and there's room for Canada to support that. Thank you.
I'd like to comment on the wording, the ethnic cleansing. That Azerbaijan has numerous occasions have declared that Azerbaijani government, Azerbaijani people, state is ready to embrace its Armenian citizens. There is no question of the intent, that there is an intent of ethnic cleansing. I think that's an overstatement and exaggeration. And when it comes to the peace process, peace is possible. Rules-based international order is possible, and that's what Azerbaijan has been advocating for. Territorial integrity of states, and then we can talk about minority rights.
Thank you, Mr. John Gearley. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Jangili, we've already had some discussions in the past together. You seem to be an extremely reasonable man, and I sincerely believe that you really yearn for peace in the region, but there's a certain number of points that remain inexplicable to me. For example, if it's true that you believe in the intention of the two presidents to reach a peace agreement, how can you explain the fact that just a few weeks after they met, under the aegis of France, the government of Azerbaijan decided to launch an offensive on Armenian territory? It was a large-scale offensive. In fact, it was launched in September. How do you explain that?
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. From what I know from the media and the facts that I've seen on the news, my interpretation is that the September skirmishes happened after large-scale Armenian provocations, and Azerbaijan had to take action to prevent imminent attack on its territory.
I'll have to interrupt you right away. There was no Armenian attack against the Azerbaijani territory. It was Azerbaijan that attacked Armenian territory. So if we're really looking for peace, so how can we reconcile that claim with this large-scale offensive on the actual territory of Armenia, which is technically not being challenged? I can't quite understand that.
The border that you're referring to, Mr. Bergeron, Armenia for 30 years did not recognize that the border existed. Armenia thought that the border existed where the border passed through the territory which it occupied for all those years. Now Azerbaijan have come to a border which is internationally recognized, but it's not demarcated and delimited. So Azerbaijan has called for a number of times that let's sit together and let's demarcate the border and let's agree on where the border passes.
I understand, but does that need to be done through arms? The presidents had a meeting just a few weeks before that to try and reach an agreement, and then once again, Azerbaijan takes up arms against Armenia. Is that the right way to do things, to reach a peace agreement?
I think we've seen it a number of times in the past, Mr. Bergeron. In 1992, when Azerbaijan and Armenian presidents were in the talks, Azerbaijani town of Shusha was occupied. Right during the talks, that the peace talks were going on.
So because the Armenians have done it, we need to do it too?
No, absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. However, we're not fully privy to what happened on the ground and what affected Azerbaijan's security perceptions at that point. So therefore, the fact that the state acted to prevent an imminent attack, this is what the Azerbaijani government has stated. I have no reason to believe that it's otherwise.
Okay, you've said in your opening remarks that the Azerbaijan government was ready to welcome its Armenian citizens. So why are you letting them leave but not letting them come back?
That's a very good question, Mr. Bergeron. I think there is a misunderstanding there. There is nobody being, that's not true that the Azerbaijani government is letting people out and not letting people in. I think the statement by the president of Azerbaijan was different. It was that we want to welcome Armenian citizens, Armenian community as our citizens of the country. But if anyone who is not content with the situation, we can't keep them. That's the essence of the statement. It is not that the people leave and they cannot come back. For the last 2 years, Mr. Bergeron, there have been people going back and forth without any problem. And what I wanted to quickly touch on another issue, that according to the November Agreement, 2020 November Agreement, Armenia undertook to guarantee the passage of unobstructed access of between the Western Azerbaijani regions and Nakhchivan region. It hasn't happened. For 2 years, Azerbaijan has been negotiating to get that access, but it hasn't been happening.
So once again, does that authorize Azerbaijan to actually block the corridor and leave the Nagorno-Karabakh population without food?
Absolutely. I don't think that is being done as a retaliation for that. And I don't think there is an imminent starvation that is being that we're seeing on the ground. I think we've seen from the media that there is supplies and food is there's access for supplies and food to the region. But the situation is serious. It has to be resolved. It cannot stay like this. There are serious concerns for the people living there, but the serious concerns for Azerbaijani side as well.
So on the side, I'll come back to that then later.
We go to Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Professor Waters, you have commented in the past on problems with Canada's arms export regime and the cancelled export permit for components sold to Turkey and transferred on to Azerbaijan. Can you tell us more about your concerns about Canada's arms exports regime and what you think needs to be done to ensure we're not contributing to this or other conflicts?
Work of this committee on those arms transfers were very important in having the suspensions put in place. And, to my knowledge, Canadian-made sensors or other weapons are not being used by Azerbaijan's forces in current skirmishes or in the current very fraught some version of peace that we're seeing in Azerbaijan today. I mean, I have other concerns about Canada's arms exports, including to Saudi Arabia and other countries, and I'd be happy to get into that if that was of interest to the committee. But I'm not sure that the arms exports are an issue for the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict today, but they certainly are in broader scope. Something that I think brings Canada into disrepute in terms of its international obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty.
Moving then to humanitarian law, can you explain what the parties to this conflict need to do in order to respect humanitarian law? In other words, are there violations right now of international human law? What are they, and what do you think ought to be done to remediate those?
Thank you, Mr. Davies. I think, or Mr. Chair, Mr. Davies through the chair. I think there are two sort of separate, three legal frameworks, if you will. The first is the ceasefire obligations, trilateral, being breached, and I'm not even going to point fingers and say that it's only being breached by one party. My particular concern is with respect to the humanitarian access. For me, that breaches both international humanitarian law, or the law of armed conflict, as well as international human rights. So when we're thinking about international human rights, for example, the rights of the child, the fact that several thousand school children in Nagorno-Karabakh can't go to school right now because their schools don't have electricity or heat, raises issues such as human rights issues, such as children's rights to education. With respect to international humanitarian law, to the extent that there is remaining an armed conflict issues such as of the killing of Armenian prisoners of war. This has been identified by Human Rights Watch, amongst other international humanitarian law issues, remains an ongoing concern. There may or may not be the full return of prisoners. It seems to me that there are credible reports that prisoners have not been returned from Azerbaijan to Armenia. But in the fall, there was a video recording of apparently 5 Armenian prisoners of war being killed, and Human Rights Watch has reported on this. The failure to provide the humanitarian corridor or to allow relief supplies to pass freely and unhindered is also a breach of international humanitarian law. There might be some quibble about whether there's still an international armed conflict, but I would argue, given that there have been attacks on Armenia proper in the fall from Azerbaijan, that a state of international armed conflict remains. And so the obligations to allow international humanitarian relief supplies to flow freely, unhindered, remains an issue.
Thank you. It strikes me, and I'm wondering if you could provide what the international law regime would tell us about this, that one of the underlying bases of the problem here is you have a strongly, mainly Armenian population enclave within the territory of Azerbaijan. And I'm just wondering, I have read before about the principle of self-determination. And I'm just wondering, what does the international law tell us about perhaps a potential solution that might see the people of that region democratically select, what their future is as a people? Do they have that right? Do they not have that right? Does it require Azerbaijan and Armenia's agreement? What can you tell us?
And in some ways, Azerbaijan's actions over recent months since the ceasefire was put in place have promoted the ethnic Armenian population's right to self-determination. Our Supreme Court, for example, has said in the Quebec secession case that the self-determination right applies in colonial or colonial-like situations, or where an ethnic minority is unable to find self-determination internally, and where rights are being abused. We've seen those kinds of rights being abused over the last couple of years. So if anything, the right to self-determination is stronger now. But what I would argue is, let's get away from a binary territorial integrity versus self-determination issue. It's got us absolutely nowhere in terms of this conflict, as well as other conflicts in the former Soviet Union. There are literally dozens of ways in which territory can be understood to be shared. And it's important to be creative here. And both sides should be pressured. This is where pressure is needed. Both sides should be pressured into making the concessions necessary to find a lasting and durable solution. It's not impossible to imagine a situation where Armenians and Azeris flourish in the South Caucasus together in friendship. Perhaps I'm naive, perhaps I'm unduly optimistic, but I think it's possible. And there are numerous situations where creative solutions have been found, and what's needed here is compromise. And I'm not sure a kind of black and white binary self-determination versus territorial integrity approach will get us very far.
Mr. Jahangirli, quickly to you.
Mr. Davies, I'm afraid your 6 minutes are up.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So now we go to the second round of questions. Mr. Epp, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming here today. This is a series of emergency meetings dealing with the humanitarian crisis. We all recognize it's nestled within a much broader and more protracted conflict. But what we've heard today have been some conflicting testimony, so that's where I'd like to begin my questions. Mr. Jahangirli, you stated that the president of Azerbaijani's statement that people were free to move back and forth if they were content with the situation. Can you describe, this is a study to deal with the humanitarian situation, can you describe the humanitarian situation right now in Nagorno-Karabakh?
I'm not privy to the situation, to the humanitarian situation in that region.
Testimony that it is dire, that and we've heard medicine is not getting through and not enough food. Some aid is getting through, but not nearly enough. We heard testimony in an earlier panel that the Lachen corridor was open and free to movement. You're saying it's been more a controlled movement. What objective criteria would you suggest that this committee evaluate so that we can collectively determine Canada's position on the present crisis? Or would you not describe it as a crisis?
Well, I believe the crisis has been imminent in that region for 30 years. It's not today, it's not a year ago, it's not 5 years ago, but it has been a crisis for many, many years. Although the conflict was frozen, it was very much alive in terms of the line of contact, across the line of contact where Armenian troops were stationed within Azerbaijani territory for 26, 27 years. Right now, what we're seeing is the Azerbaijan, for the last 2 years, offering peace, that we have to sign a peace with Armenia, and then we start talking to Armenian citizens, and it has already started talking to Armenian citizens. So last year, many contacts took place between the local authorities of Azerbaijan and Armenians living in Karabakh region to solve their day-to-day problems. I think like water, like electricity. A couple of months ago, I've seen on the press that President of Azerbaijan signed a decree for mandating a gas line, special gas line, to be laid until 2025 to supply the region with gas and electricity. So this is happening, that Azerbaijan has putting forward these proposals, but the peace agreement has to be signed, and then it will move forward much faster.
So what is the present state of living conditions within Nagorno-Karabakh at the moment?
Difficult for me to ascertain that.
Okay. Can you describe the relationship between the control of the Lachen corridor by eco-terrorists as opposed to the Azerbaijani government? Is there a relationship between the activists, I misspoke, eco-activists and the Azerbaijani government?
Speaking of eco-activists, I invite this committee I call on this committee to invite their spokesperson to testify. I've put that. I've asked several committee members to get that, to have that the person who is right now in the with the protesters to speak. So if you get the chance to speak to the people who are on the ground, you will have a much better understanding of what's going on.
Thank you. I'd like to direct my final question to Mr. Waters. You referenced Canada's 30-year relationship, diplomatic now, with Armenia. We've heard testimony in the earlier panel that perhaps the present situation nestled within the protracted conflict would be aided by Canada also establishing a relationship with Azerbaijan. Can you comment, from your perspective, as to whether that would be beneficial to the peace process or not so?
Do you think Canada should speak with Azerbaijan? And it has to be with Azerbaijan, the government authorities, because unfortunately there is no independent civil society in Azerbaijan right now. So there's no two-track diplomacy with Azerbaijan. It's with the regime or not with the regime. I do think we should speak with the regime, absolutely. And we should encourage peace. And we have leverage with Armenia in a way that we didn't even a year ago. And I think we should use that leverage as well to encourage both sides to make necessary concessions, because difficult concessions which will be difficult to sell politically at home, will be necessary by both sides.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Epp. We now go to Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for reasonable presentations. I think both have a sense, I feel, their integrity and their sincerity with saying that there are ways that we need to end this, and they're very honest about what they do know, what's on the ground. Because I think when we talk about conflicts, what we see is that both sides always have their story to tell, and those stories are nearly always biased. And so, as Rob Oliphant said earlier on today, the first casualty of war is truth. So we need to talk about how we can get this to happen. The if there really is a blockage of humanitarian aid, we've heard some people saying there is, we've heard some people saying no, certain things are getting through and that there are videos of certain things are getting through. The bottom line I wanted to ask is this. Russia is now there in that road, and that corridor, to keep peace and to allow for movement. It is my feeling, and I am the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly head of a delegation. I talk to both sides every time I go to these meetings. And they are both, the parliamentarians seem to be reasonable people. They're on the right side of this. They want to make changes. Yes, they each have beefs about certain things. But I think there is a willingness there for people to speak, a willingness. What I feel, though, is both sides don't want Russia there. Russia was always, they were always under the aegis of Russia, and they want to get away from that. And so my question is this: given that Russia is not necessarily trusted, given that the European Union, while it is there making helping with assistance, the reality is that you need to have the OSCE, which understands the history, whose nation states surround that region, belong to that region. Would it not be an idea for Canada, which is a member of the OSCE in good standing, to actually try and talk about how the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, can actually be that force that observes and that makes things happen while the agreement is going? I realize Minsk has died because Russia is in it and because Russia continues to want to influence the region. I realize that Minsk has no chance of working now with Ukrainian war. So we have some real practical problems to resolve. Is the OSCE the best body to kind of intervene? And that would include Canada, that would include all of the 57 member states, many of whom have the trust of both Azerbaijan and Armenia. Could I get a quick response both from Mr. Jahangiri and the professor?
Thank you very much, Dr. Fry, for this question. I think you pointed to a very pertinent issue, that Russia's presence in the region and the fact that both countries, both societies, both countries want to get to distance themselves from Russia's influence and Russia's involvement. But there is one major distinction here. That's right. Currently, both countries, they're trying to do so, but Armenia started to doing so only after that Russia stopped supporting its to sustain the occupation of Azerbaijani territories. For 26, 27 years, Russia supported Armenia as part of the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, which Armenia and Russia are a member of, to sustain the occupation, to guard Armenia's borders, to make sure that Armenia's troops stationed in occupied territories of Azerbaijan, which contributed to 700,000 people in Azerbaijanis living in IDP camps.
I am aware of the history. What I'm talking about is moving forward. What I'm talking about, which is the best way to move forward? What is the best vehicle for doing it? Is the OSCE still the better vehicle?
I don't think the OSCE has leverage in the region to continue negotiating with the parties. The European Union has achieved a lot of progress in mediating the conversation, mediating the talks between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I believe that's the way that both parties have seen it. Prague Declaration last year that brought Azerbaijan and Armenia recognize their commitment that they will recognize each other's territorial integrity within international recognized borders. So European Union is the way to go, I believe, in that respect.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there time for the professor to give a quick and
Give
dirty.
you 20 to 30 seconds, Professor
All
Waters.
right, Professor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So, Dr. Fry, as a former member of the OSCE mission in Kosovo, I'm a big fan of the organization. I do fear that the organization has some tough days ahead of it. And while I think we should push the OSCE to continue to act as an intermediary, potentially even to have a field presence there, I agree with my colleague that the European Union has a current presence on the ground, one that it's agreed to renew. And Ms. Vartanian from the International Crisis Group referenced it as well, the renewal of the mandate. We should absolutely support that. We should support any forum and every forum where we can encourage the two parties to dialogue. But if I just stress one more thing, though, it's that the sort of fake news approach to the humanitarian corridor issue is really puzzling and problematic for me. And while there's much to discuss in terms of finding a durable peace, this issue of allowing humanitarian access unfettered is a really important one and threatens civilians now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Thank you, Mr. Waters. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 2.5 minutes, Mr. Bergeron.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. First of all, quickly to Mr. John Girley. I was happy to hear you saying that we need to find a solution to the current crisis. But on the website of your Network for Azerbaijani Canadians, you've got a statement from the 21st of January where there would be 5 points that would be proposed to Armenia to normalise relations between the two countries, and you do not mention the blockade at all of the Lachin corridor. Why is it not mentioned? Then secondly, what are the efforts that have been deployed by Azerbaijan so far to stop this blockade of the corridor in compliance with what it agreed to under the ceasefire agreement?
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron, and thank you for visiting the website of our organization. Our organization's website is not a news page. We are using the page for connecting with our members and with our community. And we're not making statements on everyday events that is happening in the region. To your second point, if you could.
Well, first of all, to come back on that first point, Mr. Chair, I'd like to recall that that statement was dated the 23rd of January. And secondly, what are the efforts that have been made by Azerbaijan to stop the blockade of the corridor, which would be in compliance with the ceasefire commitments? What efforts have been made?
I think for 2 years that this road existed for unimpeded access is demonstration of Azerbaijan's commitment to make sure that the traffic was unimpeded up until the protests began. But in that 2 years, Mr. Bergeron, Armenia did not uphold to its commitment, did not honor its commitment to open the communication and access for Azerbaijan to access Nakhchivan region of Azerbaijan. So we're talking about the commitment of one party. We have to talk about the commitment of other party as well.
Voulez-vous commenter, Professor?
Would you like to comment, Professor Walters?
Simple comment, Mr. Bergeron, and that's that there is no humanitarian crisis in Nakhchivan. I agree with my counterpart that we should. There should be a comprehensive peace deal which includes Nakhchivan, but Nakhchivan is well supplied from Turkey. There's simply no humanitarian issue, whereas the Lachin corridor presents a clear and pressing humanitarian issue right now.
Thank you very much.
We now go to the last question. Mr. Davies, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to both witnesses for being here. I realize these issues engage very deeply held beliefs and feelings, and I appreciate you sharing your positions with us. In my remaining time, I'd like to give each of you just about a minute just to advise on what you think is the best way forward. I've heard repeatedly, and I sense that everybody does want a just peaceful resolution to this situation. So I'd like to give each of you a minute to tell me what your advice would be to share with us, how we can achieve that.
Can I?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. The way forward is to continue calling and encouraging and urging both parties to achieve a peace agreement, peace deal. That will stop the illegal trafficking of landmines to Azerbaijani territories. That will stop that will facilitate the traffic and access of Armenians of Karabakh to Armenia proper, as well as ensure the access of western regions, between the western regions of Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan region. And I disagree that the point that that was made that there is no crisis in Nakhchivan, and therefore it doesn't deserve to have an access. We don't know where. I don't know how my colleague has established that there is no crisis there.
If I might, Mr. Jahangirli, I
Yeah.
want to make sure there's time for Mr. Waters. That was the previous question. Thank you. Dr. Waters?
Mr. Davies, on January 19th, the European Parliament passed a resolution on the humanitarian consequences of the blockade in Nagorno-Karabakh, which, quote, urges Azerbaijan to respect and implement the trilateral statement of 9th of November 2020 and immediately reopen the Lachin corridor to enable freedom of movement and ensure access to essential goods and services. It also urges the parties to come to a comprehensive peace agreement. There's two tracks here, which to my mind are quite simple. We both have to encourage immediate access for humanitarian goods and people to travel back and forth. The idea of children being stuck in Armenia proper and unable to return to their families in Nagorno-Karabakh is simply untenable. We have to have this two-track where we demand, frankly, as a player on the international stage, and a country that now has a presence in the South Caucasus, that the humanitarian corridor be opened. We also, at the same time, encourage and urge and, frankly, demand both parties continue to negotiate and come up with a durable and comprehensive peace solution. And I would encourage us to do something like the European Parliament has done in that respect.
Thank you, both of you.
Very much, Mr. Davies. With that, we can now conclude this hearing today. Allow me to thank Mr. Jahangirli. Allow me to thank Professor Waters. These were complicated issues, but your perspectives were very, very helpful. So thank you for that, and the meeting stands adjourned.